I have today for you maybe one of the most brilliant pieces of political satire and political interviewing that I've seen. Sacha Baron Cohen, as we've talked about, has a new show on Showtime. It's called Who is America? Sacha Baron Cohen, you may know from characters such as Ali G, Borat, Bruno, the Dictator. He has a new character who's an Israeli anti-terrorism expert called Eran Morad, or as the Israelis might say, Eran Morad. And as Sacha Baron Cohen says during his actual show. And in this interview, he speaks to accused serial child sex assaulter Roy Moore, who of course lost to Doug Jones in the Alabama special election, accused by multiple women, including some very young women, of sexually assaulting them. It's unclear when this interview took place, and that's kind of relevant. And the concept is the following. Colonel Eran Morad says to Roy Moore, that they have developed in Israel a device, a piece of technology, which can detect sex offenders and particularly pedophiles because they secrete an enzyme called DDHT, which is supposedly detectable by this piece of equipment. And what he does is just as a sample, he puts it over himself and then he puts it over Roy Moore. And of course, the gag is it beeps over Roy Moore. Roy Moore doesn't know that it's obviously just like a metal detector. It's a totally standard metal detector. And it gets really, really awkward. Roy Moore visibly uncomfortable and ultimately ends the interview earlier than planned. Take a look at this.
They have now used this technology to identify other abnormalities. It turns out that sex offenders, and particularly pedophiles, secrete an enzyme for DDHT, which is actually detectable. It is 3 times the level of non-perverts. So the phrase sweating like a rapist is actually based on science. So in Israel, they have developed a machine that is used in schools and playgrounds to detect anyone coming in. And if they detect a pedophile, the wand alerts the law enforcement and the schools within a 100-mile radius. It is very, very simple to use. You just switch it on, and because neither of us are sex offenders, then it makes absolutely nothing. You just put it on, you put it nearby. Wait, this is obviously a problem. Hold on. Hold on. It must be faulty. It's malfunctioning. I'm sure it will do the same with the other guy here. Chezi? Yeah. Let me just take it. Sorry, is this your jacket?
Yes.
Did you lend the jacket to somebody else, maybe?
No. I've been married for 33.
Sure.
I never had an accusation of such things.
What?
I am not accusing you at all. This is
Well,
not...
then, if this is an instrument, certainly I'm not a pedophile, okay?
No, but the machine is...
Well, I don't know, maybe Israeli technology hasn't developed properly.
This is 99.8% accurate.
Well,
it is not saying that you are a pedophile, of course not.
I am simply cutting this conversation right now.
No,
Thank you.
Have you been...
Been nice.
Have you
I
been
support
in the Philippines?
Israel. I don't support this kind of stuff. Thank you.
No, I'm not saying that you're a sex offender.
This is just the best. And we don't know when it was filmed, and that's sort of relevant because, of course, Roy Moore was accused by multiple people of child sexual assault. Strictly speaking, it's not pedophilia because as far as we know, he didn't try to have sex with prepubescent girls, just girls that are very young and not legally adults in some states. But the funniest part of all this is that Roy Moore seemed to believe the technology was legitimate, right? Like, it's just a regular handheld metal detector. It clearly doesn't measure the secretion of DDHT or any chemical which would indicate whether somebody's a pedophile. As crazy as the entire thing is, and as brilliant as the entire thing is, Roy Moore seemed to believe that the technology is real.
I actually think he kind of passed the test, though, right? Because if he said that, oh, this actually is not my suit code, it's someone else, I'm borrowing it.
Yeah.
Then he would have failed, right?
Well.
But I think he found the best way out of this whole scenario.
Who would believe that? I think he said something totally boneheaded, which is, I've been married 33 years. Like, that doesn't explain whether you do or don't like little kids, right? If anything, that's a response that should raise a red flag because it says nothing about pedophilia, right? Are you attracted to prepubescent children? I've been married for 33 years. It's actually a non sequitur when you think about it.
I guess I'm also just comparing it to the other Sacha Baron Cohen interviews.
Yeah.
Like he got one Republican to blurt out the N-word and
Yes, he
to
did.
expose himself. He got other Republicans to advocate for a kindergartens program
You
where
think this is better
3
than
and
that?
4-year-olds have weapons. Yeah, it's much better.
No news yet about whether Roy Moore is sending his Jewish lawyer, who we know he has because he and his wife talked about how they have a Jewish lawyer, in order to prove that they don't dislike Jews, to sue the colonel here. And Sacha Baron Cohen, of course, dragging these people beyond the limits of its absurdity. And I was thinking, like, how far would he have to go where no one, like everybody gets that it's just a goof, you know? And I think it would be disturbingly far. I think it would be crazy what he would have to do to get to a point where nobody thinks it's a real thing.
I mean, there have been a few people who have called him out. Apparently, he showed up to one gun store,
Yeah.
and the owner called him out for being Borat, and there was
Yeah.
another congressman who didn't advocate for the program he was pushing. So it doesn't work every time.
If you don't like this, tell me why, because I think that this is absolutely and totally brilliant. Donald Trump has unleashed another unhinged attack on Twitter, a series of bizarre and confused tweets rife with the bogus capitalization we've become accustomed to, and most importantly, totally baseless allegations. The focus is Robert Mueller and Russia and the investigation. I'm going to show you the tweets. It's very clear Trump is nervous between the Manafort trial starting tomorrow, Cohen ready to give it all up to Robert Mueller, news that Trump knew and approved of the Trump Tower meeting with Russians promising dirt on Hillary. The guy is clearly nervous, and yesterday he unleashed the following tirade about Robert Mueller. I won't even mention that there are 14 improper or 13 improper capitalizations here. Just know that they're there. There is no collusion, Trump said. The Robert Mueller rigged witch hunt, headed now by 17, increased from 13, including an Obama White House lawyer, angry Democrats, was started by a fraudulent dossier paid for by crooked Hillary and the DNC. Therefore, the witch hunt is an illegal scam. Is Robert Mueller ever going to release his conflicts of interest with respect to President Trump, including the fact that we had a very nasty and contentious business relationship? I turned him down to head the FBI one day before appointment as special counsel. And Comey is his close friend. Also, why is Mueller only appointing angry Dems, some of whom have worked for crooked Hillary, others, including himself, have worked for Obama? And why isn't Mueller looking at all of the criminal activity and real Russian collusion on the Democrat side Podesta dossier? I'm wondering if there's anything that's true in that rant. 13 random capitalizations, but beyond that, Democrats aren't running Mueller's investigation. In fact, Republican Mueller, appointed by Republican George W. Bush, is running it. The dossier wasn't fraudulent. It also wasn't the basis for the investigation. Nothing about the probe is illegal. That's been explored significantly in detail at this point. And the fact that Mueller was FBI director for Obama, again, seems totally irrelevant since he was appointed, not only is he a Republican, he was appointed by Republican George W. Bush. And what you've got to realize is that Trump's 4-tweet tirade does nothing to attack the merit or the facts of what happened, or what Cohen knows, or what Trump did. And I like how also Trump says he had a very nasty relationship with Robert Mueller. There's this story, Pat, that Mueller angrily left Trump's golf club like 10 years ago over a dispute over golf club fees. Mueller has put out a statement, or his spokesperson has, saying he just left the club. Like, there was really no controversy. But in either case, that just has nothing to do with this.
Seems so minor. I'm moving. I'm going to a different club. I don't want to support this anymore.
I'm going to play golf somewhere else.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's why there's a so-called witch hunt that has already found 32 people to indict. If that's the big blockbuster that makes Mueller personally committed to a vendetta against Trump, you're going to need to come up with something bigger. And this is all the behavior. Somebody who's really worried that the probe is not only not ending, it's advancing and it's getting closer and closer to Trump. And to put a final point on that, let's go to White House Press Secretary Sarah Huckabee Sanders herself. She said back in 2016, quote, "When you're attacking FBI agents because you're under criminal investigation, you're losing." That seems to be the most prescient comment about this entire thing. And of course, it wasn't made about Trump at the time, but it certainly seems to apply today. Send me your thoughts. What do you think is behind this absolutely unhinged Twitter tirade that Trump unleashed? I'm on Twitter at @DPakman. The show is on Twitter at David Pakman Show. We had a big bombshell blockbuster story over the weekend, and it relates to that infamous Trump Tower meeting. This is the meeting attended by Donald Trump Jr. and Paul Manafort and Jared Kushner as well as Russian lawyer, not Italian, Russian lawyer, Natalia Veselnitskaya, at which dirt on Hillary was promised. It's the center of a lot of controversy. And the big news is that Michael Cohen now claims, Donald Trump's former personal lawyer now claims, that he was personally there when Donald Trump was told about the meeting ahead of time, something he previously denied knowing about, and also said, let's do it. And this, if true, is absolutely and totally massive. Michael Cohen is reportedly willing and ready to say this to Special Prosecutor Robert Mueller under oath, and it has been specifically and widely denied by Donald Trump, by everybody around him. Donald Trump claimed that he knew nothing about this meeting until he heard about it the following year when the New York Times asked him about it before they reported on it. That would obviously be untrue if Michael Cohen's allegations are true. Of course, Donald Trump continues to deny knowing about it. He says Cohen is lying to get himself out of other trouble. Donald Trump, among other tweets this weekend, sent one where he said, quote, "I did not know of the meeting with my son, Don Jr. Sounds to me like someone is trying to make up stories in order to get himself out of an unrelated jam. Taxi cabs, maybe?" He even retained Bill and Crooked Hillary's lawyer. Gee, I wonder if they helped him make the choice. The problem is, Trump's already been caught lying about this meeting, right? So aside from Cohen's claim that Trump knew about the meeting and approved the meeting, Donald Trump initially said he had nothing to do with drafting the letter that was published in response to news of the meeting. Later, we found out Trump dictated the letter. So if anybody here has a history of lying about this particular meeting, it's Donald Trump, not Michael Cohen. And Trump said it, multiple lawyers said it, Sarah Huckabee Sanders, Trump Jr., they all said Trump knew nothing about it. And there have already been some hints that it isn't so clear Trump knew nothing. Because even though Rudy Giuliani now is saying it's all lies, back in May, Rudy Giuliani didn't even deny it. He vaguely sort of said, I would be surprised if Trump could remember knowing about the meeting ahead of time, which is very different than to say, no, Trump knew nothing about it. And then just last month, Rudy Giuliani said the following to George Stephanopoulos about who wrote that letter responding to the meeting, which of course was riddled with lies. Rudy Giuliani now explaining why, listen, everybody just changes their stories all the time.
And a lot of people look at the president's shifting explanations, the White House shifting explanations for what happened in that meeting at the Trump Tower back in June of 2016 with Don Jr. I remember when this was first reported, Jay Sekulow was on my program, so the president had nothing at all to do with that letter. Later, Sarah Sanders said, well, wait, he sort of weighed in, but he didn't dictate it. And now this letter from the president's lawyers say very, very clearly he dictated the statement. How do you explain those shifting explanations?
Happened to me with the whole situation of repaying the money that was laid out by Cohen. When the president first talked about it, nobody focused on it. Nobody thought about it. That was a very busy time. And then when we got on board, I went through everything. It was the only change we had to make. At that point, this other change had been made. When you consider the big scope of this narrative, 4 or 5 changes. It's a complicated
thing. The president was there. He was dealing with the letter. At first, it was all denied, and now you're saying he dictated.
But I don't know that Jay would have to answer that, and I've talked to him about it. I think Jay was wrong. I mean, this is the reason you don't let the president testify.
Right.
Our recollection keeps changing.
This is the best. Everyone's recollections are constantly changing. And Rudy Giuliani tries to excuse the fact that Trump lied by saying, listen, I also have lied on television before. Of course, not what he's actually implying. So Giuliani has also been vague about exactly what Trump knew and when. And then in March, remember Sam Nunberg, he said to CNN that, quote, he talked about it a week before, meaning Trump talked about the meeting a week before it happened. And then we also have Stephen Bannon, who in his own book said, quote, the chance that Don Jr. did not walk these Jumos up to his father's office on the 26th floor is zero, meaning that Trump Jr. clearly talked about it with Trump Sr. But you have to remember that all along, it always seemed like Trump knew about it and was lying, because 2 days before the meeting was on June 9, 2016. 2 days before that, June 7, 2016, here is Trump on video promising upcoming dirt on Hillary in just a few days. What a coincidence. The meeting was scheduled for the 9th, and on the 7th, Trump says, very soon, in a few days, I'm going to have news for you about Hillary Clinton.
I am going to give a major speech on probably Monday of next week, and we're going to be discussing all of the things that have taken place with the Clintons. I think you're going to find it very informative and very, very interesting.
Of course, that never happened because they didn't actually get the dirt at the meeting, but it's yet another piece of the story that makes it seem like Trump did know. In fact, there's nothing to suggest Trump didn't know. We've got 3 people saying Trump probably knew to Trump definitely knew. 2 days before, Trump previewed it, and even on the day of, there were some tweets sent that related to it.
Yeah, and he dictated the response. And also, this was a very small operation, right? His presidential campaign.
Yeah,
it
supposedly.
took place at his own building, the place where he lives and the place where he works, and it involved his son, his son-in-law, and his campaign manager. How did he not know about this?
He knows nothing about why would he know what's going on in his own building involving his own kids, his own campaign, and the person he's running against? That has nothing to do with the guy. He was making a deal for a window treatments at the time. Okay, so legal issues, possible legal issues. First of all, no one is claiming Cohen has recordings, right? So it would be Michael Cohen's word that Trump knew about it, and Cohen is willing to say that under oath to Robert Mueller, but let's imagine it could be proven, or at least like if it rises to a claim that Trump knew in advance and there was a room full of people who said, Trump said let's do it, and you get some kind of corroboration. There's a legal source quoted by Politico which says, everybody in the room when Trump says let's do this is indictable if one overt act occurred after the meeting, such as actually having the meeting at Trump Tower. That is potentially accessory to conspiracy or a conspirator. Number 2, Barbara McQuaid is a former U.S. attorney. She says if Trump was aware of the meeting in advance and said, let's do it, that he could face criminal exposure under a number of different legal theories, although, of course, that's separate from whether you can indict a sitting president, right? The answer is probably not. You would first need to impeach. Not going to happen under a Republican House and Senate. And the big issue is going to be corroboration, because Cohen's claim alone isn't likely to make this open and shut. But if you've got Cohen's testimony under oath to Robert Mueller, and Mueller can find emails or texts that coincide with this, that people who were also in the room may have sent or received, then you have a different story. And Cohen plus Nunberg's testimony and some text messages, now you've got a building story. And this isn't about whether Trump knew. It seems almost blindingly obvious that he did. The question is, can you prove that Trump knew? And that's more complex. Slowly, every lie is falling apart. You'd have to be willingly ignorant or aggressively stupid at this point to think Trump had no idea about the meeting. But the question is, can it be proven?
I think so, and I think it's part of a broader strategy, right? Cohen puts out there that Trump knew about the meeting, and then he has his lawyers go on TV and have them deny it, and he denies it himself on Twitter, and then you release the tapes. I mean, that seems like a pretty good strategy to me.
Well, along those lines, one other thing. It's not 100% clear that the leak that Cohen is willing to say this came from Cohen, because Cohen's lawyer, Lanny Davis, said, oh, we didn't leak this. And that suggests it was the Trump team that leaked this. Why would they do it? Historically, they do that to get ahead of something that's even worse. And of course, Paul Manafort's trial starts tomorrow. Michael Cohen is about to say who knows what. There's a lot of different problems going on. So if Cohen was about to come forward with this, it's possible the Trump team leaked it to get ahead of it. And by the way, I'd still love to see the guy's tax returns. Let's not forget about that. Now, I want to go on to the next thing related to Rudy Giuliani, because I now have video for you so bizarre and so confusing that it's almost beyond belief, except it's the 2018 Trump administration and everything is believable. So the first thing I talked about on the program today was Rudy Giuliani, Trump's actual lawyer, moving from there was no collusion to collusion wouldn't be a crime even if it happened. During some of these same interviews, he also started talking about a second meeting related to the Russia-Trump Tower meeting, okay? I'm going to try to set this up in the clearest possible way because it does start to get complex, I think, by design. He was interviewed on CNN by Allison Camerata. During that interview, Rudy Giuliani admits to a previously unknown pre-meeting to the Trump Tower meeting with the Russians promising dirt on Hillary. And it's like, we need a flow chart, Pat, to explain the timeline of this thing. The Trump Tower Russia meeting was on June 9th of 2016. June 7th of 2016, as I played for you yesterday, Donald Trump came out and said, very, very soon, I'm going to have a bunch of dirt on Hillary. In this clip, what Rudy Giuliani admits to, if you listen carefully, amidst all the confusion that he seems to be experiencing himself, is that that same day, June 7, 2016, there was a meeting held to discuss the upcoming meeting with Natalia Veselnitskaya and the entire thing that we now know about. Listen carefully to Rudy. Remember, to Rudy, we didn't know about this meeting until Rudy mentioned it yesterday on CNN.
The meeting with the Russians, how can you be sure that the president didn't know beforehand? You're saying it's just a he said, he said.
Nobody can be sure of anything. In a situation like this, you have two things that argue against Cohen. It's 2-on-1. I'm sorry, three things. Then you get to the other meeting he says he was at that the president wasn't at. It's 3 or 4-on-1. That's the two. He also has added, or Lanny Davis has added, that there was a meeting 2 days before the meeting took place with Donald Jr., Jared, Manafort, and 2 others, Gates, and 1 more person.
And that's a real meeting. You're saying that's
a real meeting on another provable subject in which he would not participate.
The meeting, just so I'm clear, the meeting with the Russians, who was in there?
I'd have to. Jared.
Yep.
It was with Donald Jr.,
yep.
Jared, and 2 to 3 other people. I'm not sure of exactly who.
But
the one who came in and allegedly told the president about it was Donald, which Donald denies, the president denies, and there's no corroboration of. And Cohen has never said this at any time up until now.
Okay, so Allison Camerata says, so that was a real meeting. And Rudy Giuliani says, yeah, that meeting took place. He denies that it was about the Trump Tower meeting. But of course, just hours later, Donald Trump goes out and says, hey, in a few days, I'm going to have really big stuff on Hillary. So of course, Giuliani admits to this other meeting having taken place. Immediately, it's huge. People pick up on it. There was another meeting. There was another meeting apparently allegedly to talk about the upcoming Trump Tower meeting. As you know, that same day, Trump promises dirt on Hillary. So the timing of it is obvious. But right after this, we hear the following from Donald Trump. Just as a reminder from yesterday, the timing, it makes perfect sense that there had just been a meeting and Trump was coming from it. And then he says this.
I am going to give a major speech on probably Monday of next week, and we're going to be discussing all of the things that have taken place with the Clintons. I think you're going to find it very informative and very, very interesting.
The alleged meeting that Rudy Giuliani confirmed on CNN took place just hours before Donald Trump came out and said that. So then, of course, this gets really bad for Trump and Rudy Giuliani. So immediately, Rudy Giuliani calls back into Fox News. Remember, he had already been on Fox and Friends in the Morning. He calls back into Fox News, and then he denies anything about this second meeting. No, there was no second meeting. It's almost impossible to understand Giuliani in this clip, but what he is clearly doing is denying now that the second meeting happened, which he just previously confirmed happened on CNN earlier the same day.
Second, there wasn't another meeting that has been leaked but hasn't been public yet.
Okay.
That was a meeting, an alleged meeting, 3 days before. According to Cohen, or according to the leak, maybe Cohen will withdraw this. I don't know. They haven't pursued it. And the 2 publications are not going to publish it. I think they found independent contradiction. He says there was a meeting with Donald Jr., with Jared Kushner, with Paul Manafort, with Gates, and possibly 2 others, in which they, out of the presence of the president, discussed the meeting with the Russians. We checked with their lawyers, the ones we could check with, which were 4 of the 6. That meeting never, ever took place. It didn't happen.
Didn't happen. So now he says it didn't happen after saying just hours before on CNN that it did. Everybody following so far? So then it was so confusing that there was a follow-up question asked and Rudy Giuliani making even less sense.
Well, let me just ask it this way. So you've now told us about 2 meetings. There was one that the public knows about, which when you talk about a meeting and you say that the president wasn't there, that's the one that everybody would assume that we're all on the same page about. But what you're saying now is that there was another meeting that was leaked that has not been made public, and I would assume until now, really described by you, Rudy Giuliani, in detail, that happened 3 days prior that had Don Jr., Jared Kushner, Paul Manafort, Gates, and possibly 2 others. And that's the meeting that Michael Cohen says the president was not, or the president knew about ahead of time, but you say the president was not there.
No. Cohen is not alleging. I don't know. All I have are two reporters telling me Cohen told them there was a meeting 3 days before with a group of people that I said, and that they discussed the Russian meeting, and that the president was not there. He didn't say the president knew about it.
Okay.
I am telling you that meeting didn't take place, never happened.
Yes, there was another meeting which didn't take place. It's a meeting that doesn't exist. So it's some sort of a meeting. It's a non-existent meeting. And then lastly, here's a key thing, Rudy Giuliani choosing very careful language. Giuliani saying Trump was not, quote, at the meeting, which is important, and I'll explain after.
This is Melissa Francis, and I just want to jump in. I don't think any of that really addresses the question of why you would say he wasn't at the meeting.
Why did Cohen say?
No, why are you saying that the president wasn't at the meeting? I understand those two meetings that you just set out there, but that doesn't explain why you're saying he wasn't there. Who asked if he was there? No one asked if he was there.
Cohen is alleging that the meeting took place. We are making it clear that the president was not at that meeting. Cohen doesn't even allege that. To cut it off.
So Trump has a history of listening to meetings via speakerphone. So they keep talking about how Trump wasn't physically there. He didn't have a presence at the meeting. He wasn't at that meeting. That, to me, is another one of these signals that, of course, Trump knew about it, but he may even have been connected via speakerphone, but he wasn't physically there. I still am unsure this is a strategy, Pat, right? Giuliani could be this dumb and this terrible of a lawyer. It could also be a way of accidentally leaking things just to cause confusion and to make it even more difficult to know what the hell is going on.
I really think he's this dumb, though. And, you know, the Trump's best lawyers are all now gone, like Ty Cobb and John Dowd and even Michael Cohen.
You think this is who he has left?
He's left with the B team. Yeah, Rudy Giuliani's the guy who was loyal to him, and he rewarded him with a job.
If this isn't some brilliant strategy, who needs prosecutors when you've got Rudy Giuliani as your defense attorney? That's all the prosecuting that you really need. Send me your thoughts. What do you think is going on here with this informational shell game? I'm on Twitter at @DPakman, and the show is on Twitter at David Pakman Show.
Welcome to the David Pakman Show. I am, of course, not David Pakman. I am Benjamin Dixon, host of the podcast, The Benjamin Dixon Show. You can find me anywhere you find podcasts. David is out of town, and he will be back tomorrow. And in the meantime, we have a lot of news to cover. Of course, we have to begin the day with the President of the United States, Donald Trump, who has once again inserted himself into the legal process surrounding the Mueller probe. I want to bring up a tweet that the president shared early this morning, and this is what he had to say. He said, "This is a terrible situation, and Attorney General Jeff Sessions should stop this rigged witch hunt right now before it continues to stain our country any further. Bob Mueller is totally conflicted, and his 17 angry Democrats that are doing his dirty work are a disgrace to the United States." That's how he started. He continued with the next tweet. This is what he had to say. He said, "Paul Manafort worked for Ronald Reagan, Bob Dole, and many other highly prominent and respected political leaders. He worked for me for a very short time. Why didn't the government tell me that he was under investigation? These old charges have nothing to do with collusion, a hoax." All right, we'll stop right there with those two tweets. So the president has already, he's done this before. He's inserted himself into the process, but this is the first time that he's directly called for Attorney General Jeff Sessions to put an end to this. You will recall last week and the week before that, Republicans started the process of impeaching Rod Rosenstein because of this investigation. And the president is getting nervous. If you see his behavior patterns, if you see what he's doing, he's making the mistakes. And it's very likely that he is going to implicate himself with his actions at this point. It's the saying, the saying that it's not the crime that gets you, it's the cover up. And that's what the president is doing here. Now, he's, of course, labeling it a witch hunt. That's what he does. He labels everything a hoax. Anything that he disagrees with is considered a hoax. But this is, like I said before, this is the first time that he has outright called for Jeff Sessions to put an end to this. Thankfully, Jeff Sessions doesn't have the ability to put an end to this because he has recused himself from this process. But underneath all of this is what the president is actually trying to do. He's trying to win this in the court of public opinion. He knows that if he can make this issue as hyperpartisan as possible, then it's very likely that nothing will be done, even if Mueller turns up something sensitive, something that implicates him. Now, as it stands right now, there's not a lot of evidence that we've been privy to publicly that implicates the president directly. I think the closest thing we have now is Donald Trump Jr., where it's come out that the president knew about the meeting with Russian operatives at Trump Tower. Previously, Trump Jr. told the Congress that the president did not know about it. And so the highest level of ramifications so far really rests with Donald Trump Jr. and the possibility of perjury. But that still hasn't stopped the president of the United States from being bold enough and brash enough to insert himself in the process in a very direct fashion. This lets you know that we're way past. We're so far beyond any standardized norms, any sense of protocol, any concern for the appearance of letting justice carry its way out. You know, we're well past that point. At this point, it's a free for all, and the president has decided to wage his war against Bob Mueller and the Department of Justice, his Department of Justice. And before I even finish that sentence, we have to point this out, right? The irony, the biggest irony in all of this is that this is Bob Mueller, who is a Republican, Rod Rosenstein, who is a Republican, or at least was appointed by Republicans. You have a Republican Department of Justice headed up by a Republican Attorney General who was appointed by a Republican president. And they are waging a war against their own, but they're swearing that this is all a result of the Democratic Party. I want to bring up the last tweet from Donald Trump this morning on the issue. He said, Russian collusion with the Trump campaign, one of the most successful in history, is a total hoax. The Democrats paid for the phony and discredited dossier, which was, along with Comey, McCabe, Stokes, and his lover, the lovely Lisa Page, used to begin the witch hunt. Disgraceful. It's a little difficult reading the president of the United States because of the absurd things that he says. But the fact of the matter is that he's still spreading himself fake news. The dossier, the origins of the dossier goes back to a Republican operative that was trying to do opposition research on Donald Trump. That's been proven, but that doesn't stop the president of the United States from spreading his own fake news, from doing everything that he can to muddy the waters, because he knows this thing to be true. He knows that people who love him and still support him, no matter what he's done so far, they don't care about the truth. They don't care that the dossier actually had origins in the Republican Party. They are going to continue to say the same lie, that it started with Hillary Clinton and started with Democrats. They're going to continue to push that because the president of the United States continues to push that same lie. So here we are with stories that in any other administration would be enough to bring that administration to a complete gridlock. But this is the unique strength of Donald Trump. This is the unique ability, his uncanny gift. If he's talented in anything, it's not being a businessman, it's not being a leader, it's his unfettered shamelessness, his ability to go further and further and further to destroy any sense of shame that this country has. And we are not even in a position to actually process this. We're dealing with the president who throws so many different ridiculous situations at us in a single news cycle that we can't even really adjust to consider how significant what just happened really is. I mean, there've been news cycles where in one day we have 5 stories that in any other administration would have brought that administration down. But for Donald Trump, it's just the 12 o'clock news break. And that's his uncanny gift. And this is why when everyone was saying, I don't know if you recall earlier in the administration, people kept tweeting and kept saying, this can't be the new normal. This isn't the new normal. The reality of it is that this is the new normal because we have all gotten adjusted to it. We've all gotten accustomed to the president of the United States being involved in any number of scandals that would have brought down any administration. I don't care, Democrat or Republican. What the president of the United States is mired in right now was enough to bring down any previous administration. And yet he just keeps trudging through his own swamp that he's supposed to be emptying out.
It's getting to be time for all media across party lines, across platforms, to unite to protect themselves from Donald Trump, who is waging a never-ending, increasingly disturbing war on the media. I told you last week that the Trump administration has launched some major attacks on freedom of the press, calling the media the enemy of the American people, talking about journalism licenses, opening up libel laws to make it easier to sue media outlets. They banned CNN reporter Caitlin Collins from a Rose Garden press conference for some questions she had asked. They've been pushing this outrageously partial push-pull to turn people even more strongly against the media. And now Donald Trump went on, this isn't even the first Sunday Twitter tirade that we're talking about today, but he went on a Sunday Twitter tirade against what he calls the very unpatriotic media. Why is the media unpatriotic, according to Trump? Because they report what government does. He specifically calls out the New York Times and the Washington Post, who, by the way, have done really great investigative reporting on the Trump administration. This is what dictators do, directly attacking the press that holds them accountable, or at least tries to hold them accountable. And Donald Trump tweeting, when the media, driven insane by their Trump derangement syndrome, reveals internal deliberations of our government, it truly puts the lives of many, not just journalists, at risk. Very unpatriotic. Freedom of the press also comes with a responsibility to report the news accurately. 90% of media coverage of my administration is negative, despite the tremendously positive results we are achieving. It's no surprise that confidence in the media is at an all-time low. I will not allow our great country to be sold out by anti-Trump haters in the dying newspaper industry, no matter how much they try to distract and cover it up. Our country is making great progress under my leadership, and I will never stop fighting for the American people. As an example, the failing New York Times and the Amazon Washington Post do nothing but write bad stories, even on positive achievements. They will never change. It's quite a mouthful. 90% actually sounds low. Like, I can think of 3 to 4 things Trump has done that make sense, and some of those might even have been done by accident. If 10% of coverage of Trump were positive, it would actually be too high, given what Donald Trump has actually done, because this is an administration that's a total and utter sham. And what he's trying to do is something that's not that uncommon for the right, which is they want to get a monopoly on patriotism. It's another sign of authoritarianism, being the arbiters, the gatekeepers of what's patriotic and what's not patriotic. And it was also revealed yesterday, interestingly, that Donald Trump had a meeting with the New York Times publisher, A.G. Sulzberger, and talked about how he thinks the media is the enemy of the people. And Sulzberger reportedly warned Trump and said, it's kind of a dangerous thing for you to be doing that. And yes, it's dangerous to the foundational tenets of our country. PR-wise, I don't know that it's that dangerous for Trump to call the media the enemy of the American people, because he's having some success turning his base against a free press.
Yeah, it is really working for him, and that's why fewer and fewer Americans support like the Robert Mueller investigation, and his poll numbers are going up too. I just think it's completely unfounded. Like, it's not the media's job to be patriotic. It's the media's job to tell the truth and to be objective. And, if they were going to be patriotic, we would have state-run media, which I hope we don't have anymore. That's a fair point,
which is, layer one is, if you're going to attribute patriotism to the media, I argue that discussing and exposing what our government does is a patriotic act, because it aligns with what the sort of foundational tenets of our country are. But there's another side to it, which is media should not be making decisions on the basis of patriotism. They should be making decisions on the basis of their duty to report what it is that's going on. And it's almost like irrelevant whether we attribute patriotism to the media.
Yeah, I mean, you'd see that maybe in North Korea or Russia or Qatar, but hopefully not in the United States.
The most patriotic act you can do as a media outlet is to report on what is happening, and what the government does is part of that. And of course, Trump claimed to be a fan of transparency during the campaign. Seems almost hypocritical that now he thinks reporting on what the government does is bad. But that being said, as I mentioned earlier, Paul Manafort's trial starts tomorrow. It's very clear Michael Cohen is about to give up the really good goods. Trump's own CFO from the Trump organization might be called to testify under oath. The guy is probably panicking, and that relates to why he's going on multiple totally outrageous, hyperbolic, apoplectic Twitter rants on Sunday over the weekend.